By touching her legendary weapon, the human awoke a bond he never meant to claim. Warriors of every breed scaled, horned, and fanged lined the Colosseum, their eyes locked on the platform where the blade of cinders waited, half buried in black stone, glowing with a heat that warped the very air around it. This was no ceremonial relic. It was a weapon of living fire, forged in the dying heart of a star, pulsing with the spirit of ancient warriors who had bled worlds into submission. Only one bloodline had ever wielded it without being reduced to ash. The Flameborn, Cathra, stood alone on the platform, her towering figure clad in molten scale armor that shimmered like coals. Her face was carved from fury and pride, eyes blazing with contempt as she scanned the challengers that dared step onto her sacred soil. She was no mere warrior, she was a scorched daughter of Clan Vernick, bred in the volcanic pits of Kroteth, raised among beasts that ate fire and spat steel, and yet, as the next contestant stepped forward, her lips twisted into something between disgust and amusement. A human. A tan male no taller than her shoulder, clad not in armor but in dusty travel leathers, sweat glistening across his brow from the heat. No weapon, no title, just 2 hands and a look in his eye that refused to lower. "What is this?" Cathra bellowed, her voice echoing like a thunderclap across the Colosseum. "Did the council send me a gift from the kitchens, or is this how Earth honors its dead?" The crowd howled with laughter, alien voices rising in cruel harmony. Some roared, others clicked or screeched, but all of them jeered at the human standing motionless at the edge of the heat-scorched platform. Merrick Vane didn't move. He didn't flinch when the ground beneath him trembled from her footsteps, didn't blink when a nearby warrior snapped his fangs inches from his face. He simply stared at the blade. Cathra leaned closer, grinning. "You'll blister before you touch it, little one. That sword has devoured better flesh than yours." She turned her back on him and walked in a wide circle, motioning to the blade that still pulsed like a living heart. "Let him try," she called out, laughter thickening her throat. "Let the fire have its meal." Merrick said nothing, but his jaw set and a storm brewed quietly behind his eyes. The blade waited. Cathra turned slowly, arms crossed, eyes gleaming like 2 burning coals as she watched him step forward. The platform cracked beneath his boots with every inch he dared, the heat rolling off the blade of cinders now licking at his skin, already raising sweat to steam. The Colosseum fell into a hushed murmur, unsure whether to laugh again or watch in silence as this soft, fragile human walked toward a weapon known to turn most men to ash within heartbeats. Cathra couldn't decide if she wanted him to fail or surprise her. "You know," she said, stalking closer, "I've seen giants scream from that blade's kiss. I've seen half-blood warlords reduced to cinders before they got within arm's reach." She stepped into his path, towering above him like a fire-wrapped statue. "What exactly do you think you are?" Merrick looked up at her, not with fear, not with anger, but with something else, something deeper. His voice, when it came, was low and calm. "I'm the one who doesn't need fire to burn." She stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she threw back her head and laughed loud, genuine, brutal. The crowd echoed it, sensing blood, sensing foolishness. "You're a worm dancing in a bonfire, Taryn. One step more and you'll beg me for mercy or scream." She took a slow step back. "But if you insist, go ahead." The blade hissed like a serpent, its molten veins pulsing brighter as Merrick stepped into its radius. Heat surged like a wall, blistering, punishing, hungry. His skin burned, but it didn't blister. Boots stuck to the stone for a second, but he moved. One breath, one step, and then his hand wrapped around the hilt. Cathra's eyes widened as the blade did not consume him. Instead, the fire yielded. A burst of light exploded from the sword, not outward, but inward, like it had been waiting, buried rage folding into something reverent. The Colosseum gasped as the fire coiled around Merrick's arms, spiraling in threads that should have incinerated him. And yet he stood. The sword rose in his hand, slow and sure, until its full length shone above his head like a second sun. Cathra stumbled back, her breathing sharp, her pride cracking under the weight of the impossible. Around them, the entire arena seemed to forget how to breathe. She looked at him, this soft-skinned Terran with no armor and no name, standing unharmed in a sea of fire, and something ancient, something buried in her warrior soul, shifted. She stepped forward and knelt, not in defeat, but in recognition. The arena held its breath, but Catherine knelt in stillness, her head bowed beneath the glow of the flaming sword she had once called her own. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the wind seemed afraid to interrupt what it had just witnessed. The Flameborn did not kneel. They did not submit, not to kings, not to gods, and certainly not to men from distant blue worlds. And yet Cathra, first blade of Clan Vernick, whose axe had split warlords and whose laughter had echoed through 10 conquest moons, was on one knee before a human with scorched boots and steady breath. When she rose, it was not in shame but in revelation. Her eyes were no longer mocking but searching, as if trying to see beneath Merrick Vane's skin to find the fire she had failed to name. "The sword it chose you," she said softly, more to herself than to him. "I mocked the spark because I mistook it for ash." Merrick lowered the blade slowly, its flame folding back into a quiet pulse like a heartbeat. "You dared me," he said, voice low but firm, "because you thought I'd burn. You never asked what I'd already survived." That struck her harder than the heat ever could have. She stepped around him now, circling as if rediscovering something buried. The arena watched, silent as the grave, warriors on every ledge shifting their weight, unsure whether to cheer or flee. "The sword tests the soul," she muttered. "It sears weakness, devours fear, exposes every truth you try to bury. You shouldn't have passed, Taryn. Don't pass." Merrick turned toward her, sword still in hand. "Maybe you don't know Taryn's." Her jaw clenched, and for a moment the wildness returned to her stance. "Do not think I am weak because I bowed," she said. "A warrior kneels only when their war is over, or when they find a flame stronger than their own." He nodded. "Then rise." "I don't need a follower." She blinked. "You ask me to rise as what?" "An equal," Merrick said. That word equal was heavier than any command he could have given her. It didn't insult her pride. It honored it. She hadn't expected that. She had expected triumph or arrogance, or the subtle venom of conquest hidden in soft, tan politeness. Instead, she saw no hunger in his eyes, no need to dominate or humiliate, only the steadiness of a man who had walked through fires he didn't brag about and who had no need to be louder than the blade that followed him. Cathra stepped forward and planted her clawed hand on his chest. "I am Cathra of the Molten Pit, born to scorch the bones of planets. I mocked you to measure your fire." Her fingers tapped once over his heart. "And now I see it burns deeper than mine." Merrick didn't flinch, didn't smile. He simply said, "Then, burn with me." Above them, the twin suns dipped further toward the horizon, and the arena lights shimmered as a breeze finally dared to stir. Whispers rippled across the Colosseum, but none dared speak aloud the truth their eyes screamed. A human had touched the blade of cinders, and it had not broken him. By dusk, word of the human who tamed the flame spread like wildfire beyond the obsidian walls of Tharval. Warriors mounted flame beasts to carry the tale to the other moons. Embers were cast into the sky by clan priests, each one a signal. The impossible had occurred. The fire had chosen an outsider, an off-worlder. Taryn. Merrick walked the torch-lit halls of the Victory Hold, the sword sheathed in a wrap of thermal filament cloth strapped to his back. He'd taken it not for glory, but because the blade had pulsed when he let go, as if unwilling to be left behind. The bond between them was sealed in heat and resolve. Now it pulsed gently against his spine, with each step a living memory of the moment Cathra bowed. Cathra herself stood at the mouth of the forge chamber, arms folded, waiting like a sentinel. Her armor still radiated warmth, not from fire, but from the fury she'd spent wrestling with herself. She watched Merrick approach, and for the first time since their challenge, she didn't speak. She just looked at him, really looked, as though she were recalibrating everything she'd once believed about strength. He stopped just a few feet from her. "This blade reveals what we bury," he said. She nodded. "It does. I felt it. But it didn't burn me," Merrick said. She tilted her head. "Because you've already lived through something worse, haven't you?" He met her eyes. "A long time ago, I was a scout engineer during the siege of Hyros 9. The atmosphere was poisoned. My squad died one by one, eaten from the inside by chemical fire. I was the only one who walked out 46 days alone under red skies, trying not to scream." Cathra stepped forward. "And you never told anyone?" "No one would listen," he said, "until today." She reached up and unclipped the plated neckguard of her armor. Her scars were not hidden, they wrapped around her shoulder like molten vines, twisted and thick. "I was captured once by the Frost clans," she said. "They chained me to ice for 9 nights. When they came to mock me on the 10th, I bit the throat out of the first guard and used his jawbone to break my bonds. They stood in silence, scars on flesh, fire in their pass, and something unspoken in their gaze. She smirked at last. Maybe we're not so different, Terran. He gave a small nod. Maybe not. Her hand reached out not to shake, but to press palm. To palm. A warrior's bond in her culture. It meant alliance forged in equal bloodshed. Not superior, not subordinate equals. The fire in the room pulsed once in response. And for the first time, the warrior Cathra didn't feel alone in her fury. And Merrick, for the first time in years, didn't feel like an outsider. Not here. Not with her. They came not long after the bond was sealed. Not emissaries, not warriors of diplomacy, but a detachment of Fangorn slayers armored in volcanic obsidian and crowned with the sigils of conquest. They bore no greetings, no reason, and no questions. The moment their boots struck the basalt soil of Tharval, they drew their plasma pikes and demanded the Terran be surrendered. Cathra met them in the center of the upper tier, her axe on her back, her breath visible against the rising heat of the forge winds. The Fangorn bred for extermination and purging ritual impurity stood in a tight circle with armor that hissed with heat regulation. Their leader, Kravex of the Nine Brands, pointed his spear toward Merrick, who stood behind Cathra and said nothing. The Terran stole the sacred blade, Kravex hissed. It was not his to touch. Cathra stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. Then the flame must have failed its own judgment. Kravex bared his teeth. Flame does not choose. It consumes. It tests. Cathra's eyes narrowed, and it found him worthy. The standoff burned in the air like lightning ready to strike. Warriors lined the high walls, watching, unsure whether they were witnessing heresy or prophecy. Kravex gave no signal he didn't need to. 3 of his Fangorn moved at once. Cathra unslung her axe in the same heartbeat, moving faster than most could follow. She shattered the first spear in a single downward arc, her blade catching fire mid-swing as if answering the call of old war drums. Merrick dodged left, barely avoiding a plasma blade aimed at his ribs, and for a breath it was only instinct that moved him. But his sword roared. Without thinking, he drew it. The cloth wrappings burned away as fire erupted from the hilt in a spiral of molten light, wrapping around his arm like a serpent of justice. He met the Fangorn head-on, blades singing with ancestral fury. The impact sent shockwaves through the stone floor, and for a moment the air tasted like copper and smoke and history rewriting itself. Cathra fought like she had never bowed. Every strike was calculated chaos, a dance between rage and grace, flame trailing her weapon like a comet's tail. She took 2 Fangorn down in 4 strokes, brutal, clean, final. Merrick moved beside her, not behind. Their movements syncopated like heartbeat and breath, one striking high, the other low, blades crossing in a choreography forged not from training but shared conviction. Kravex roared and charged himself, shoving aside his broken warriors. His blade sang a cruel song as it collided with Cathra's axe, and the shock snapped sparks into the sky. Merrick lunged forward, his sword cleaving the stone between them, separating Cathra from Kravex just long enough for her to pivot. Together they struck, her axe from the right, his sword from the left. Kravex fell to his knees, armor split, the mark of defeat glowing red-hot across his chest. But Cathra did not kill him. Merrick didn't speak. Instead, Cathra stepped forward and said only one word, "Go." The surviving Fangorn dragged Kravex away into the dusk, their pride bloodied, their certainty fractured. The arena was still. Then a voice rose from the northern tier, old, cracked, belonging to one of the Forge elders. The flame does not bow, but tonight it stood beside another, and with that, the fate of the sword and its wielder was no longer questioned. It was believed. The aftermath did not bring rest. Merrick and Cathra stood alone beneath the sky, both covered in the soot of the day's battle, the sword still humming at his back. But it wasn't victory they carried, it was responsibility. The bond between them had drawn the eye of the High Forges, the rulers of flame law, those who wrote the code of warriors in smoke and molten scripture. They will summon us, Cathra said. That night, her voice more quiet than Merrick had ever heard. Not for recognition, for judgment. He nodded once. Let them. She turned to face him fully, her hand resting on the haft of her axe. They will ask you what gives you the right. They will offer you a chance to return home, and they will make it sound like mercy. He met her gaze. Then I'll show them the fire I carry. The summons came at dawn, carried by 3 fire serpents that dropped tablets of lava inscribed commandment before the gates. They were to travel to the Forge of Veritas, deep within the crust of the planet, where lava fell like Waterfalls and truth was extracted by force. Their journey was brutal. The path burned, ash choked the air. Every step tested the very will to move forward. But Merrick never faltered. Not once. Cathra watched him walk over flame bridges barefoot, watched him kneel beside a molten spring and speak to it as if asking permission to pass. She said nothing, but something in her heart cracked and grew all at once. The Forge of Veritas was a cathedral of pressure and heat, walls alive with screaming embers and floating anvils. The high forges, 3 beings made of magma and smoke, sat atop thrones of cooled star metal, their voices layered with millennia. Why do you carry what was not made for you? They asked Merrick. He didn't speak of strength or conquest. He didn't speak of rights. He said, because when I held it, it stopped wanting to burn. The high forges fell silent. Fire dimmed. And then they turned to Cathra. You challenged him. I did. You knelt. I rose again. The fire brightened, and then the central forge leaned forward, voice deep and final. Then let it be carved in the stones of heat. The blade has chosen its bearer, and the bearer has chosen not dominion, but bond. The air shook as the decree was sealed, not with words, but with flame. As Merrick turned to leave, Cathra stood at his side again, not behind, not beneath, but beside. You could have ruled us, she said, watching the lava swirl below. I didn't come here to rule, he answered. She grinned. Then what did you come for? He looked at her, a fire flickering in his eyes that matched her own. Someone who wouldn't flinch when the world burned. And in the heart of the deepest forge of her people, Cathra knew she had found him. The fires of the Forge of Veritas still echoed in Cathra's bones as they ascended back to the surface. Every step was lit by a warmth no longer hostile but reverent. The fire had judged Merrick Vane and found him not to be an intruder or a thief, but a torchbearer of something older than bloodlines, not flameborn by heritage, but by will. And in the old warrior's code of Tharval, will was stronger than birth. Above them, the stars returned. The twin moons, one red, one white, moved across the sky in twin arcs of witness. As they reached the cliff's edge where the dark sand met the glowing stone, the wind shifted. It was soft, scented with iron and ash and old memories. Cathra paused there, letting the wind wrap around her braids, her axe still strapped to her back, now light in her grip compared to the weight of what had changed inside her. She turned to Merrick. You're not what I expected, she said, voice stripped of armor. He raised a brow, adjusting the sword strap across his shoulder. What did you expect? A man who'd melt, she said with a rare, crooked smile. A body crushed beneath pride. A heart that would fold before the sword burned him. And what did you find? Cathra didn't answer at first. Instead, she stepped close enough that her voice could drop to something only he would hear. I found someone whose fire matched mine. Not above, not below even. That word even carried a weight Merrick hadn't expected. Not an insult, not condescension, but the highest praise the Flameborn could give. In the days that followed, they returned to Tharval not as challenger and defender, but as bonded warriors. Side by side, they walked through the gates of a people who had only ever looked down on Terrans, and this time no one laughed. Some bowed, some stared, all stepped aside. Even the elders dared not speak above a whisper when they passed, for the air shifted with the weight of legend forming in real time. The training grounds that once mocked Merrick now echoed with his steps as Cathra led him across blackstone fields, teaching him the ancient forms of flame combat. But it was not one-sided. For every lesson he received in scorched footwork or two-handed flame deflection, he offered her Terran insights, balance drawn from zero-gravity skirmishes, breath control taught by Earth's high-altitude rangers, techniques of patience forged in solitude and siege. Cathra laughed when he first caught her by surprise and spun her off balance. No one had done that to her in years. You're cheating, she growled, rising from the ground with a grin that split her scarred cheek. No, he said, offering his hand. I'm adapting. Their sparring became poetry, not war, just movement between two who now understood one another more deeply than either had once believed possible. They didn't speak of love, not yet. On Tharval, love was not declared with words but forged in battles fought side by side, and Merrick had proven again and again that he would never stand behind her, only with her. They saw the smoke before they heard the drums. Far across the horizon, where the red dunes rolled endlessly under the cracked moons, black plumes coiled into the sky like columns of shadow. Raiders not from Tharval, not Flameborn. These were outsiders, ironclad mercenaries from the broken. moons of the Herrick system, where war was endless and honor sold by the ton. Their fleet of dust crawlers had come not for conquest but for plunder, and they had chosen poorly. Cathra stood on the overlook, her body still as obsidian, her clans wore banners fluttering behind her, though she didn't need them to be recognized. They want our forges, she said flatly. They want to melt our flame and sell it by the kilo. Merrick stepped beside her. Then they're not leaving. She turned to him, and in her eyes he saw not rage but trust. You don't have to stand with us. Your name is already carved in the stone. You could walk away. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he drew the blade of cinders and plunged it into the black ground between them. The fire pulsed outward in a ring of orange light, and every warrior on the ridge turned their eyes to him. Then let them come, Merrick said. We'll show them what fire really is. The battle came fast. Mercenary tanks tore across the dunes with shrieking treads, their hulls plated with star steel and salvaged wreckage. But Tharval's warriors met them not with numbers but with fury. Cathra charged into the front lines like a lightning strike in molten form, her axe singing through the air as she cut a crawler in half. Merrick fought at her side, the blade of cinders glowing white hot, carving through armor like bone. They moved like two halves of a single storm. One mercenary, a giant cyborg from Herrick's deep vault, swung a chain blade the length of a shuttle at Merrick. He ducked beneath it and countered with an upward arc that split the weapon in two, sparks bursting from the shatter point as the raider's mask cracked open. Another came for Cathra with twin energy flails. She caught them mid-swing, pulled the attacker in, and broke their neck with the blunt end of her axe before throwing the body into a fuel tank that exploded in bloom fire. And through it all, they never looked back even when the ridge caught flame, even when the command crawler of the enemy surged forward with cannon turrets pointed at the heart of the forge. Merrick and Cathra did not flinch. Together, they charged. Merrick leapt onto the side of the crawler, blade piercing the steel as he carved a hole for Cathra to follow. Inside, they tore through the final mercenaries back to back, hand to hand. And when the commander finally faced them cloaked in stolen tech and powered by reactors stolen from the flameborn dead, it was not Cathra who struck the final blow. It was Merrick. One clean stroke through the reactor core, the blade shrieking as it absorbed the final flare of power. When the crawler collapsed, Cathra emerged from the smoke with Merrick at her side. The battlefield was silent. The red dunes smoldered. The mercenaries were gone. And the Flameborn had a new legend, not of one warrior, but of two. Two who burned as one. The red dunes lay still now, smoldering under twin moons that cast long, trembling shadows across the battlefield. The dead had been buried in flame, as was tradition, their names etched into slag stone to be sung into the forge archives. The survivors, Flameborn and Terran alike, stood not in silence but in awe, for among them now were two who had fought as one, whose rhythm in battle had become indistinguishable, whose presence together made even the forge winds pause in reverence. Cathra stood atop the ridge, her armor scorched, one braid cut from a blade swipe, her knuckles scraped raw. Her axe was slung across her back again, but it felt lighter somehow, not because her strength had changed, but because she had shared it. Below her, Merrick moved among the wounded, his sword sheathed and his hands bare as he wrapped bandages and lifted the fallen. He did not command, he simply did. No word of his courage had passed his lips. The blade had burned entire tanks, had pierced the Herrick warlord's final shield, and still he spoke only of others who fell, who survived, who still needed water. Cathra watched him. She had seen warriors win battles, heard their chants fill cities, seen them raise their weapons to be glorified. But this man, this human, refused to be exalted. He knelt in the ash like any worker, arms streaked with blood not his own, his silence louder than any victory cry. She descended the ridge, slowly, not out of pain, but purpose. Her warriors parted around her without a word. When she reached him, he didn't turn. You fought like fire, she said quietly. I fought beside one, he replied, not looking up. She knelt beside him, her hand gently pressing his. You didn't just win this war, she said, her voice lower now. You changed what our people believe about the line between strength and softness. Merrick looked at her, eyes dark with exhaustion but steady. And what do you believe now? She smiled, then faint and dangerous. That maybe the heart beneath the fire matters more than the heat of it. He stared at her, truly seeing her now, not just the warrior, not just the flame-forged icon, but the woman who had never bowed until it meant something. The silence stretched between them, full of things that didn't need to be said. It wasn't just alliance anymore. It wasn't just respect. It was the moment steel softens not to break, but to become something stronger. That night, the people of Tharval gathered for the Ember Reckoning, the ritual of naming a new fire arc in the archives. It was not uncommon after great battles. But this time it was different. The high flames licked skyward as the elders summoned the tongues of the forge to witness, and the names were spoken not Cathra, not Merrick, but Cathra and Merrick, together, as one title, the flame bond, not a marriage, not a command, something older, something sacred. Two warriors bound not by blood or oath, but by flame, equal. A season passed, and Tharval was no longer a world whispered about in passing. The galaxy watched it now. From the embers of a near-forgotten culture rose something unprecedented. Unity between alien fire and Terran resolve. Diplomats arrived bearing tribute. Scholars came seeking answers. And mercenaries kept their distance, no longer daring to test the patience of the land whose defenders had bent the laws of flame. Merrick stood before the forge once more, his hands bare, the blade sheathed on his back humming softly as if breathing. Cathra stood beside him, watching the next generation of warriors train in the Black Pit arena. Some bore tusks, some bore feathers. One had 10 eyes. "Do you regret not going back?" she asked, not looking at him. "To Earth," he said. "No, I came here for something I didn't know I needed." "And what was that?" "A place where I didn't have to burn alone." She looked at him, her expression softer than any words could hold. "Neither do I." There was peace in that, not the fragile kind built by treaties and paper promises, but the kind forged in the quiet after fire, when two people who should never have stood side by side now could not imagine standing without each other. As the forge's central flame rose again in ceremonial offering, Cathra stepped forward with Merrick and placed the twin weapon sigils, her axe and his sword, into the stone before the Flameborn Council. It was symbolic but powerful. She was not giving them up. She was offering proof that together they were more than myth, more than warrior and human. They were the choice to stand when mocked, to rise when doubted, to grab the blazing sword when the world said they couldn't, and in return, the flame had done something it had never done before. It bowed, not to lineage, not to prophecy, but to truth that power is not in blood or birthright, but in the will to stand in the fire and become its equal.